Hello guys, this is Brian Mounts. We're on turfmechanic.com. I keep a nice yard full of perennial rye and Kentucky bluegrass, and I grow grass in pots. Look at this. This right here is perennial rye. This right here is Kentucky bluegrass. These two grass types are very similar. They look similar. They feel similar. Their climate that they grow in is similar. They're both cold season grasses. They both struggle a little bit in hot, dry weather. Perennial rye is going to struggle even more in drought, but it doesn't require as much water as Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass, generally, when you have it in a lawn, it's going to struggle in the heat of summer, the drought of summer. You're going to have to give probably 50 to 70% more water to this grass type, the Kentucky bluegrass, than you are to the perennial rye. Perennial rye is less maintenance. However, it does like having water. So this grass type is really perfect for the Pacific Northwest. It's a cold area that doesn't get particularly hot, nor does it ever get particularly cold. And we get lots of rain up here in Pacific Northwest. As we move further north into, let's call it polar vortex territory, Kentucky bluegrass really starts to shine because it is more cold tolerant. Both of these are going to have their own struggles with disease. Both grass types are going to deal with the disease and fungal threats better if you have a substantial root system and if you're watering the grass not very often. So if you water the grass maybe once or twice a week, let's call it on average every 5 to 6 days, and you're watering it very, very deeply on those days, you're not going to have too much of disease pressure on either of these grass types. Likewise, if you're adequately fertilizing your lawn, in addition to watering infrequently and deeply, you're also not going to have very much pressure. Both of these are similar. Kentucky bluegrass is going to have slightly better resistance to disease and fungal threats than perennial rye is, but perennial rye is so easy to just reseed spots that die that it's not really that big of an issue. Even if you're putting down weed preventers or weed killers, perennial rye is really robust in resisting those kinds of things. So reseeding patches that die off, whatever the problem is, perennial rye can be fixed really quickly, but you have to seed it. It won't repair itself. Kentucky bluegrass will repair itself because it has underground rhizomes. Rhizomes are little underground root systems or stems that go horizontally, and then they angle up, and then they start making what appears to be a new plant. But it's all the same plant system. I want to demonstrate to you what that looks like over here. In my lawn, I have a mixture of Kentucky bluegrass and perennial rye. Now, I pulled up a paver stone here, but this is a perfect example. As I pull up the paver stone, you can see all of these root systems here right along the edge where the paver stone lies. But as we move up here, we can see where the root systems kind of turn into the crowns of the grass. Now, in this area, you see a lot of just basic roots. But as we move over here, we see things like this. You see this? That is going horizontally, and then it starts angling up, and somewhere goes up in here. Now, we've got lots of these things, but as I move around, you'll see a whole bunch. There's probably a mother plant of some kind over here, bluegrass plant, that is sending rhizomes this way, and then they angle up, and then they come up above the ground. Because Kentucky bluegrass has rhizomes, you're going to end up finding down at the base, you're going to have more thatch problems with Kentucky bluegrass than with perennial rye. In fact, of all the cold season grasses, Kentucky bluegrass is going to have the most thatch problems of them all. So you're going to have to regularly think about putting liquid detaching products on this or running mechanical detachers over it. With perennial rye, you're not really going to have to do it. Now, if you mix them together, you're frequently going to find mixes to have more Kentucky bluegrass and perennial rye. So you're still going to end up having to dethatch a little bit. So here in my lawn, I also have a thatch problem. So I have to deal with that regularly. So you will too if you put this in. It's going to grow slower. It's going to germinate slower. It's going to grow slower, but it will repair itself. If you were to plant this in the spring, you would have an enormously hard time getting it to establish by the summer. Whereas perennial rye, because it grows so fast, can establish by the summer. For the most part, the base of those plants look pretty similar, but let's call it there's a shoot sticking up out of the ground for both perennial rye and Kentucky bluegrass. Now, off of that shoot, a new leaf kind of comes out of it. Both Kentucky Bluegrass and Perennial Rye have a folded vernacular. So that leaf coming out of the auricle is folded at the base and then it kind of opens up into this kind of like boat shape. Let me show you. Here is Kentucky Bluegrass. That one right there. You see how it kind of looks ever so slightly cupped at the end. Ever so slightly cupped at the end. And you see that line going down the middle? That is a telltale sign of Kentucky Bluegrass. You'll also notice on both sides of the blade, nothing really looks particularly shiny. It's kind of more matte. They're smooth to the touch and very, very soft, but there's nothing shiny about them. Now, as we come back over here to the Perennial Rye, you're going to find lots of like reflective shininess. Like, look at that right there. It almost looks moist or like mirrored, reflectioned. So what's going on here, if I pull one of these out, this one looks like a stressed blade, but it's okay. So you see how that looks matte on that side? If we flip it over, it becomes much more shiny. I mean, right there, look at that. That thing is shiny right there. Over here, you're not really seeing shine at all. Maybe a touch of it right in there, but it's just different. You're also going to find, like if I look at this blade again, that line going down the middle compared to, say, for instance, the line right there. The line on the Kentucky Bluegrass is much more pronounced. For one last parting thought, we'll talk about seed heads. Kentucky Bluegrass gets its name because it's got this little blue hue to its seed heads. So that right there is a Kentucky Bluegrass seed head. If you look at it up close, it looks a little bit like a pine tree sitting on top of a long grass blade. And it looks slightly bluish purple. Contrast that to a seed head of Perennial Rye. Look at the difference. Perennial Rye, this looks like the top of a stalk of wheat. Both of these grass types are great. They're both going to look really good in a lawn. Here, I'm in a shady spot on my lawn. You're going to find the Perennial Rye is going to do slightly better in a high shade environment. In a full sun environment, your Kentucky Bluegrass is going to do slightly better. Kentucky Bluegrass is not going to excel very much in full shade. It really needs full sun. Parting thoughts here is both Perennial Rye, both Kentucky Bluegrass are going to look and feel fantastic in cold season lawns. As you move closer to that transition zone, or if you get into drier climates or places where you're not able to irrigate as well, you're going to want to start looking into tall fescues. Tall fescues have better heat tolerance and drought tolerance than both Perennial Rye or Kentucky Bluegrass. But as you move north and you get into particularly cold areas, Kentucky Bluegrass is definitely the way to go. I hope that helps. I've got a completely written version of this down on the website, linked below in the description. Make sure to take a look at it, and I hope to see you in another video down the road.